I am a lieutenant commander. Check the ID.
Deputy Derek Miller parked his cruiser in the shadow of the fuel canopy, the engine ticking as it cooled in the humid evening air. He watched the man at Pump 5 with a gaze that had been hardened by 12 years on patrol, a gaze that was no longer capable of seeing people, only threats. Miller had been patrolling the highways of San Bernardino County for over a decade. He considered himself a sheepdog, a guardian who could spot a wolf in sheep's clothing from a mile away. But the truth, buried deep in his personnel file under 23 separate civilian complaints, was far darker. Miller didn't see wolves. He saw what his bias told him to see. And tonight, at 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in August, his bias was screaming at him. He saw a black man. He saw a gleaming, obsidian black Mercedes G-Wagon that cost more than Miller would make in 3 years. And in Miller's mind, the equation was simple, brutal, and wrong. Those two things did not go together, not legally. What Miller didn't see was the man behind the wheel. He didn't see Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Thorne. He didn't see a man who had survived the icy waters of BUD/S training, a man who had earned the trident of a Navy SEAL, a man whose chest bore the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star with valor. He didn't see a father, a husband, and a patriot who had spent 20 years bleeding for the very flag Miller wore on his shoulder sleeve. Miller unbuckled his seatbelt. He tapped the button on his chest to activate his body camera. He thought he was recording evidence of a crime. He had no idea he was recording the end of his own career. Before we step out onto that asphalt and watch this injustice unfold, I want to welcome you to the channel. We tell stories here about the collision between power and truth, and the people who stand their ground when the system tries to break them. If you're watching this, let me know in the comments where you're from. And make sure to hit that subscribe button, because the story of Elias Thorne is one you need to hear to believe. The Chevron station off Interstate 15 was bathed in the harsh, clinical glare of LED lights. It was a busy stop for travelers heading back to San Diego from Vegas or the high desert. Cars were coming and going, families stretching their legs, the mundane rhythm of American travel. Elias Thorne stood by his vehicle, watching the gallons tick up on the digital display. He was tired, not the tired of a bad night's sleep, but the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who had just finished a 2-week intensive training cycle in the desert. He was 43 years old, but his body carried the scars of a man twice his age. Shrapnel in his shoulder from Fallujah, a reconstructed knee from a jump in Afghanistan. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt with the Naval Special Warfare logo on the breast, a trident seizing a pistol and an anchor. It was subtle, but to anyone in the community, it was unmistakable. He was looking forward to getting home to his wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids. He wanted a hot shower, a cold beer, and the silence of his own living room. He wasn't looking for trouble. He certainly wasn't looking for a fight. But trouble was walking across the parking lot toward him, wearing a badge. Deputy Miller approached with a swagger that was designed to intimidate. He hooked his thumbs into his duty belt, his hand resting casually near his gun. He stopped 10 feet away, violating the social contract of personal space, just enough to send a message. "Evening," Miller said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an interrogation. Elias looked up. He scanned the deputy's face, reading the aggression in his eyes, the set of his jaw. Elias had been trained to read micro-expressions in high-stakes environments where a wrong read meant death. He knew exactly what this was. "Evening, deputy," Elias replied. His voice was calm, the deep baritone of a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. "Nice ride," Miller said, nodding at the Mercedes. "Brand new?" "It is," Elias said. "Just picked it up last month." "Must be nice," Miller said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "What line of work you in to afford a rig like this?" Elias sighed internally. He knew the script. He knew he didn't have to answer. He knew he could tell the officer to pound sand unless he was being detained. But he also knew the reality of being a black man in America. He knew that de-escalation was his job, even if it shouldn't be. "I'm in the Navy," Elias said, "stationed down at Coronado." Miller laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "The Navy? What, you an admiral? Because enlisted guys don't drive $100,000 trucks." "I've been in 20 years," Elias said, his patience thinning but holding. "Combat pay adds up if you save it." "Is there a problem, officer?" "Yeah, there might be," Miller said. "We got a call about a vehicle matching this description, suspicious activity, possible stolen vehicle." This was a lie. There had been no call. The dispatch logs would later prove that the radio had been silent for 20 minutes. Miller was fishing. He was manufacturing probable cause out of thin air because he couldn't reconcile his prejudice with the reality in front of him. Stolen? Elias raised an eyebrow. I have the registration right here. It's in my name, Elias Thorne. Why don't you let me see that? Miller said. And your license. And step away from the vehicle. Elias moved slowly. He knew that sudden movements were a death sentence in these situations. He reached into his back pocket for his wallet. He pulled out his military ID first, the CAC card that identified him as a Master Chief, then his driver's license. He handed them to Miller. Miller glanced at them, but he didn't look at the details. He didn't look at the rank. He didn't look at the expiration date. He looked for a reason to escalate. This military ID looks fake, Miller said, tossing it back at Elias. It landed on the hood of the car. And the registration probably printed it off your home computer. Elias felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, but he tamped it down. He had been shot at by Taliban snipers. He had disarmed IEDs. He could handle a petty tyrant with a badge. Deputy, Elias said, his voice hardening, that is a federal identification card. I am a Master Chief Petty Officer in the United States Navy. I am a SEAL. If you run my plates, they will come back to me. If you run my license, it will come back to me. You are making a mistake. Miller stepped closer. He was now in Elias's face, trying to provoke a reaction. A SEAL, huh? Miller sneered. And I'm the Queen of England. You think you can lie to me? You think I'm stupid? I think you're profiling me, Elias said calmly. And I think your body camera is recording all of this. That was the trigger. Miller didn't like being challenged. He didn't like being told he was wrong. And he certainly didn't like a suspect who knew his rights. Dispatch, send me a second unit. Miller spoke into his radio. I got an uncooperative subject at the Chevron. Possible 10-851. Stolen vehicle. Elias shook his head. I am not uncooperative. I gave you my ID. I am standing right here. Turn around, Miller barked. Hands on the car. Now. Elias hesitated. He looked around. People were watching. A woman at the next pump had stopped fueling. A teenager was filming with his phone. Officer, I have done nothing wrong, Elias said. You have no probable cause to detain me. Miller drew his taser, the yellow plastic weapon leveled at Elias's chest. The red laser dot danced on the Trident logo of his shirt. I said turn around or you're gonna ride the lightning, Miller shouted. Elias made a choice. He could fight. He could disarm this deputy in 3 seconds. He knew the mechanics of it. Wrist lock, elbow strike, weapon retention. It would be easy, but it would also be suicide. If he fought, he would be shot. If he fought, he would be the aggressor, so he did the hardest thing a warrior can do. He surrendered. I am complying, Elias said loud enough for the witnesses to hear. I am not resisting. He turned. He placed his hands on the warm metal of his car. He spread his feet. Miller holstered the taser and grabbed Elias's wrist. He wrenched his arm behind his back with unnecessary force, twisting the shoulder that still held shrapnel. Elias grunted in pain but didn't pull away. You like that? Miller whispered in his ear. Not so tough now, are you, hero? The handcuffs clicked. The sound was final. Elias Thorne, a man who had kicked down doors in Kandahar to save hostages, was now a prisoner in his own country, arrested for the crime of driving while black. We are 10 minutes into this nightmare, and it's hard to breathe. The arrogance, the dismissal of facts, the sheer power trip, it's infuriating. But it's also a reality for too many people. If you're angry right now, hit that like button. Let's make sure the algorithm pushes this story to every corner of the internet. And tell me, what would you do if you were Elias? Would you have kept your cool? Just as Miller was shoving Elias toward the cruiser, a second unit arrived. Officer Sarah Jenkins pulled up, her lights flashing. Jenkins was different. She was younger, newer to the force, and she had served 4 years in the Army as an MP before joining the Sheriff's Department. She stepped out of her car and walked toward the scene. Her body camera was rolling. She saw the suspect in cuffs. She saw the Mercedes. And then she saw the shirt. She froze. She recognized the logo. She recognized the bearing of the man. Even in handcuffs, Elias stood with a military posture, spine straight, head up, eyes forward. Miller, Jenkins said, walking faster. What do we have? Grand Theft Auto, Miller said, panting slightly from the exertion of his own ego. Guy claims he's a SEAL. Can you believe that crap? Jenkins looked at Elias. She looked at the ID card still sitting on the hood of the Mercedes where Miller had tossed it. She picked it up. She looked at the photo. She looked at the rank. A9. Master Chief. She looked at the name. Her face went pale. Miller, she whispered. This is real. What? Miller snapped. This is a CAC card, Jenkins said, holding it up. It's real. And this guy, Miller, he's a Master Chief. Do you know what that means? It means he printed a good fake, Miller insisted, refusing to back down. Put him in the car. Miller, stop, Jenkins said, stepping between him and the cruiser. If this is real and we arrest him for driving his own car, do you have any idea the storm that's coming? I don't care who he is, Miller shouted. He was uncooperative. He resisted. He's going to jail. Jenkins looked at Elias. Sir, she said, her voice respectful, is this your vehicle? Yes, officer, Elias said. The registration is in the glove box. My orders are in the center console. If you look in the back seat, you'll see my gear bag with my name tapes. Jenkins walked to the Mercedes. She opened the back door. There, sitting on the leather seat, was a tactical bag. It was embroidered with the name Thorn and the SEAL Team logo. Inside, she saw a uniform blouse with a rack of medals that would make a general jealous. She walked back to Miller. Derek, let him go. Now, uncuff him, apologize, and pray he doesn't sue us. No, Miller said. He was too deep in. His pride wouldn't let him turn back. I'm running him. If he's clean, I'll release him. But he's going to the station for verification. I'm not doing this on the roadside. Jenkins shook her head. She knew she couldn't physically stop a senior deputy, but she made sure her camera was positioned perfectly to capture everything. They put Elias in the back of Miller's car. It smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. Elias sat awkwardly, his shoulder throbbing. He closed his eyes and started counting. He wasn't counting seconds. He was counting the number of lawyers he was going to hire. As they drove to the station, Elias's phone rang in the front seat where Miller had tossed it. Miller looked at the screen. Wife was flashing. He let it ring. It rang again. And again. You gonna answer that? Elias asked from the back. She's worried. Quiet back there, Miller said. You're in custody. The verification process at the station should have taken 5 minutes. It took 3 hours. Miller dragged his feet. He typed slowly. He went for coffee. He joked with the dispatchers. He was punishing Elias for being right. But while Miller was playing games, the system was working. Jenkins had run Elias's name through the NCIC database correctly. It came back clean. No warrants, no stolen vehicle report, and then she did something else. She called the number on the back of Elias's military ID, the emergency contact for his command. At 9:45 p.m., the phone at the front desk of the sheriff's station rang. The desk sergeant picked it up. San Bernardino Sheriff, Sergeant Davis speaking. This is Captain Robert Vance, Commanding Officer, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. The voice on the other end barked. It was a voice that could strip paint off a wall. I have reason to believe you are holding one of my Master Chiefs. His name is Elias Thorn. And if he is not released in the next 10 minutes, I am coming down there myself. And I am bringing the Judge Advocate General of the United States Navy with me. Sergeant Davis swallowed hard. He looked at Miller, who was leaning against the counter, drinking a soda. Miller, Davis said, who do you have in the holding cell? Just some car thief suspect, Miller said. Is his name Thorn? Davis asked. Yeah, that's the name he gave, Miller said. Get him out, Davis screamed. Get him out now. That was his commanding officer, you idiot. You arrested a SEAL. Miller's face went slack. The soda can crunched in his hand. They brought Elias out. He was still in handcuffs. Davis personally unlocked them. Master Chief, Davis said, his voice trembling, there has been a terrible misunderstanding. We are so sorry. You are free to go. Elias rubbed his wrists. He looked at Miller. Miller couldn't meet his eyes. He was looking at the floor, the realization of his mistake finally piercing his arrogance. I want my property, Elias said quietly. I want my ID. I want my phone, and I want the badge number of this deputy. Of course, Davis said. Here is everything. We won't be pressing any charges. No, Elias said. You won't, but I will. Elias walked out of the station. His wife, Sarah, was waiting in the parking lot. Jenkins had called her. Sarah ran to him, tears streaming down her face. She hugged him, burying her face in his chest. I didn't know what happened, she sobbed. I called and called. I'm okay, Elias said, holding her tight. I'm okay. Let's go home. The lawsuit didn't happen immediately. Elias was a methodical man. He spent the next month gathering evidence. He hired the best civil rights attorney in California, a woman named Vanessa King, who had a reputation for eating police departments for breakfast. They filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the body camera footage. The department tried to stall. They claimed it was under investigation. They claimed technical difficulties. But Vanessa King didn't play games. She filed a motion with a federal judge. The judge ordered the release of the footage within 48 hours. When the video hit the internet, it didn't just go viral, it caused a seismic shift. Millions of people watched Miller mock a war hero. They watched him ignore the military ID. They watched him escalate a peaceful situation into an arrest. The comments section was a firestorm. Veterans, active duty military, civilians, everyone was united in their outrage. He fought for our freedom, and this is how he gets treated. Fire that deputy immediately. This is what we mean when we say the system is broken. The lawsuit was filed in federal district court, Thorne versus County of San Bernardino. The charges were extensive: violation of the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure, false arrest, false imprisonment, racial discrimination under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The trial began a year later. The courtroom was packed. Half the gallery was filled with Navy SEALs in their dress blues, sitting silently in support of their brother. It was a visual wall of solidarity that unnerved the defense team. Officer Jenkins took the stand. She had resigned from the department shortly after the incident, unable to work in a toxic environment. "I told him," Jenkins testified, her voice clear. "I told Deputy Miller that the ID was real. I told him the vehicle was legal. He didn't care. He wanted to make an arrest because he felt disrespected." "Disrespected?" Vanessa King asked. "How?" "Because a black man in a Mercedes didn't immediately bow down to him," Jenkins said. The jury gasped. But the most damning evidence was the statistical analysis Vanessa King presented. She had hired data experts to review Miller's entire career. Over 12 years, Miller had made 42 stops of luxury vehicles. In 38 of those stops, the driver was black or Hispanic. In every single case, the justification was suspicious activity. And in every single case, no stolen vehicle was found. It was a pattern. It was systemic. And it was undeniable. Miller took the stand in his own defense. He looked small in the witness chair, stripped of his uniform and his gun. He tried to claim he made an honest mistake. "I was just doing my job," Miller said. "I have to trust my instincts." "Your instincts," Vanessa King said in her cross-examination, "seem to only target people of a certain color. Is that correct, Mr. Miller?" "No," Miller stammered. "I target criminals." "Was Elias Thorne a criminal?" King asked. "No," Miller whispered. "Then why did you arrest him?" Miller had no answer. The jury deliberated for 3 days. The tension in the courthouse was palpable. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He was an older man, a retired schoolteacher. "On the count of Fourth Amendment violation, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of false arrest, we find for the plaintiff. On the count of racial discrimination, we find for the plaintiff." It was a clean sweep. Then came the damages. "We award the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $8 million. The courtroom murmured. $8 million was a huge sum. "And," the foreman continued, raising his voice, "for punitive damages to punish the defendant and deter future conduct, we award the sum of $7 million. $15 million. It was the largest individual civil rights settlement in the history of the county. Elias Thorne didn't smile. He simply nodded. He squeezed Sarah's hand. The aftermath was swift and brutal for the department. Derek Miller was fired the next day. But it didn't end there. The California Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission revoked his certification. He would never carry a badge again. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation into the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. The sheriff was forced to resign. A federal monitor was appointed to oversee reforms, including mandatory bias training and a new policy for vehicle stops. Officer Jenkins, the one who spoke the truth, was hired by the San Diego Police Department. She was promoted to sergeant within 2 years and now leads their Community Relations Division. Elias Thorne took the money and did something extraordinary. He started the Thorne Foundation for Veterans' Rights. The foundation provides free legal counsel to veterans who have been victims of police misconduct. In its first year, they took on 50 cases. Elias is still in the Navy. He's still a Master Chief. He still drives his G-Wagon. But now, when he drives, he has a dash cam that records everything. This story forces us to look in the mirror. We like to think that justice is blind, that the badge protects the innocent. But the truth is, the badge is worn by humans, and humans are flawed. Elias Thorne survived because he was a SEAL. He survived because he had the discipline to stay calm when every instinct told him to fight. He survived because he had the resources to fight back in court. But what about the guy who isn't a SEAL? What about the teenager in the Honda Civic who gets pulled over by a Derek Miller? Who fights for him? That is the question we have to answer. Justice cannot be a lottery. It cannot depend on your rank or your bank account. It has to be for everyone, or it is for no one. What do you think? Was $15 million enough? Should Miller have faced criminal charges? Let me know in the comments below, and if you believe in holding power accountable, share this video. Share it for Elias. Share it for every veteran. Share it for the truth. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.